At my graduation ceremony, my dad texted me a cold warning not to expect any help. 5 minutes later, amidst the applause, my CFO called to say we had just gone public. While my father sat there judging me, he had no idea I was now worth over $6 billion. But the real revenge wasn't the money. It was knowing I had quietly bought the debt that controlled his entire livelihood. My name is Alina Patel, and I was sitting in row 42 of the Easton Tech Institute Stadium in Boston when my father decided to formally disown me via text message. The air inside the stadium was thick with the scent of cheap sunscreen and nervous sweat. Around me, 3,000 other graduates were buzzing with a manic sort of energy. Adjusting their square caps and checking their reflections in dark phone screens, the loudspeakers were blaring a tinny, instrumental version of a classic marching song that sounded like it had been recorded underwater. Everywhere I looked, I saw pride. I saw mothers weeping into tissues that were already shredded from use. I saw fathers standing on bleachers, holding up iPads to record grainy videos of their children simply sitting in chairs. I saw a sea of families united by the sheer, overwhelming joy of seeing a chapter close successfully. And then there was my phone, vibrating against my thigh beneath the heavy black polyester of my gown. I knew who it was before I even fished it out of my pocket. My mother, Deborah, would be too busy fanning herself and worrying about whether they had parked in a tow zone. My brother, Ethan, would be hungover and likely complaining about the heat. That left only one person in the Lane family who felt the need to insert himself into my headspace right before the biggest moment of my life. I slipped the phone out, shielding the screen from the glare of the midday sun. The notification was sitting right there on the lock screen. It was from Dad. "Don't expect help. You are on your own for the rest of your life." It was followed by a single emoji, the thumbs up sign. I stared at the pixels until they started to blur. The thumbs up was a masterful touch. It was the digital equivalent of a pat on the head given to a dog you were about to leave on the side of the highway. It was sarcastic, dismissive, and cold enough to freeze the sweat on the back of my neck. A physical blow would have hurt less. It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me, instantly separating me from the warmth of the crowd. I looked up, blinking rapidly. 2 rows ahead of me, a girl named Sarah, whom I had shared a chaotic statistics class with in my sophomore year, was waving frantically at someone in the stands. I followed her gaze and saw a burly man in a plaid shirt wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, mouthing, "I am so proud of you," across the distance. I looked back down at my screen. "Don't expect help." The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud. Help? What help was he threatening to withhold? I had paid for my own tuition through a combination of academic scholarships that required a 4.0 grade average and student loans I had signed for in secret. I had paid for my dorm room by working the graveyard shift at the campus server farm, babysitting blinking lights and humming cooling units while the rest of the campus slept. I had paid for the very gown I was wearing with money I made freelancing code for a local bakery's inventory system. I had been on my own for years, but reading it in black and white, seeing it spelled out as a threat rather than a reality, felt like a public amputation. It was a declaration. He was not just cutting me off financially, which he had effectively done years ago. He was cutting me off emotionally. He was looking at this ceremony, this culmination of 4 years of sleepless nights and relentless grinding, and telling me that it meant nothing. To him, this wasn't an achievement, it was an act of defiance. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, my hand trembling slightly. I tried to focus on the stage, where the dean was droning on about the future and limitless possibilities, but my mind was violently pulled back to Maple Ridge, Indiana. Maple Ridge was the kind of town where ambition was treated like a low-grade fever, something you were expected to sweat out so you could get back to work. It was a place of rusted pickup trucks and porches that sagged under the weight of wet winters. My father, Ron Lane, was the king of that small, dusty kingdom. He ran a construction company that had been bleeding money for a decade. Though he would never admit it, to Ron Lane, there were only 2 types of work. There was real work, which involved calluses, back pain, and visible results like a brick wall or a paved driveway. Then there was fake work, which involved anything that happened on a screen. I remembered the summer after my freshman year. I had come home for a weekend, foolishly excited to tell him about a research project I had been invited to join. We were analyzing traffic data to optimize ambulance routes in dense urban areas. It was groundbreaking stuff, the kind of coding that could literally save lives. I had found him in the garage, tinkering with the engine of his truck. "Dad," I had said, standing in the doorway, holding a printout of my acceptance letter to the program. "I got into the fellowship. They're going to pay me to write code this summer." He hadn't even looked up. He just wiped a grease-stained rag across his knuckles and scoffed. "Code," he said, the word tasting like vinegar in his mouth. "You're going to sit in air conditioning and type on a toy while your brother is out here pouring concrete in 90-degree heat. That's not work. Alina, that's a hobby." "It pays $20 an hour," I had argued, my voice tight. "It pays in Monopoly money until the computer crashes," he had shot back. "You need stability. Alina, you need a skill people actually need. When the world goes to hell, nobody is going to need an algorithm. They're going to need a roof. I don't know why you think you're better than this." Better than this, that was always the subtext. Every A on a report card, every scholarship letter, every internship offer was interpreted by Ron Lane as an insult. He thought I was judging him. He thought my desire to leave Maple Ridge was a rejection of him, rather than a pursuit of myself. He weaponized the word stability like a cudgel, beating me down with it every chance he got. And now, here we were. Graduation day. The day I proved that I could survive in the world he said didn't exist. And his response was to pull the rug out from under me, just to see if I would fall. I looked around the stadium again. To my left, a guy named David was adjusting his tie. His parents had probably driven up in a nice SUV, booked a hotel downtown, and made reservations for a celebratory dinner at a steakhouse. My parents had likely driven the 12 hours straight through to save on a hotel, stopping only for fast food, with my dad gripping the steering wheel and complaining about the price of gas the entire way. They were here, physically, somewhere in the bleachers, but they weren't really here. I felt a hot, prickling sensation behind my eyes. It wasn't just sadness. It was a heavy, suffocating mix of grief and rage. Grief for the father I wished I had, the kind who would text me, "You did it," or "Can't wait to hug you," and rage at the man I was actually stuck with. Why did I still care? That was the question that burned the most. Why did his approval still hold so much weight? I was 22 years old. I was a grown woman. I had built things he couldn't even comprehend. Yet, one text message from him had the power to make me feel like a 6-year-old girl who had dropped her ice cream cone in the dirt. I took a deep breath, inhaling the humid Boston air. I closed my eyes for a second, shutting out the noise of the crowd. "No more," I told myself. The thought was quiet at first, but it grew louder, echoing in the cavern of my chest. No more. I was done apologizing for being smart. I was done shrinking myself to fit into the narrow box of stability he had built for me. I was done feeling guilty for wanting a life that didn't involve physical labor and small-town gossip. He wanted me to be on my own? Fine, I would be on my own. But he had no idea what that actually meant. He thought on my own meant I would crumble, that I would come crawling back to Maple Ridge begging for a job doing payroll for his failing construction crew. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in humility. He was wrong. I opened my eyes. The dean was wrapping up his speech. "Class of 2025, he bellowed into the microphone. "Go forth and change the world." The crowd erupted. The applause was deafening, a wall of sound that vibrated in my ribs. I clapped, mechanically, my hands stinging with the impact. I wasn't clapping for the speech. I was clapping for the funeral of my childhood. I was burying the version of Alina Patel who craved Ron Lane's validation. "Just get through today," I whispered to myself, my voice lost in the roar. "Walk across the stage, shake the hand, take the paper, don't look at the bleachers, just walk." I reached into my robe to turn my phone off completely. I didn't want to see another text. I didn't want to see a follow-up message telling me that they were leaving early to beat traffic. or that I shouldn't expect a graduation gift because the flight of stairs to the stadium was too steep. I wanted silence. But just as my thumb hovered over the power button, the phone buzzed again. I froze. A second text? A retraction? A typo? I looked at the screen. It wasn't a text. It was a call, and the name flashing on the display didn't belong to Maple Ridge. It didn't belong to my family, or my classmates, or anyone in the academic world of Easton Tech. Marcus Reed, CFO. My heart hammered against my ribs. A different rhythm this time. It wasn't the heavy thud of dread. It was the sharp, staccato beat of adrenaline. Marcus never called. We lived on Slack and email. We communicated in spreadsheets and lines of code. If Marcus was calling me, voice calling me, at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, while I was sitting in a graduation ceremony he knew I was attending, something was happening. Something massive. The name Lumisphere Analytics didn't appear on the screen, just Marcus's name, but the weight of the company hung in the air between me and the phone, my secret, my second life, the hobby my father thought I played with in my spare time. I looked up at the stage. They were about to start calling names. I looked back at the phone. It was still vibrating, demanding attention, a lifeline thrown from a world that actually valued me. My father had told me I was on my own. He had told me not to expect help. I stared at Marcus's name and felt a strange, cold smile tug at the corner of my mouth. My father was right. I didn't need his help, because while he was busy typing out insults, the world I had built with my own two hands was calling to tell me just how wrong he was. I didn't turn the phone off. I slid my thumb across the screen and answered. As I held the phone to my ear, shielding the microphone from the roar of 3,000 graduating students, the voice on the other end was just a buzz of static waiting to resolve into words. But in that split second of suspension, the distance between the life my father thought I lived and the reality I had built felt like a physical canyon. It was a divide that had started long before I stepped onto the Easton Tech campus. It started in the dusty, sawdust-choked living room of a small house in Maple Ridge. I grew up in a world defined by calluses. My father, Ron, ran lane construction with a grip that was both iron-tight and desperate. He measured a man's worth by how much dirt he had under his fingernails. By 5 in the afternoon, my mother, Deborah, was the ghost in the machine of our family. She was a night shift nurse at the county hospital, a woman perpetually existing in the gray twilight between exhaustion and sleep. She moved through the house on soft soles, avoiding conflict the way one avoids a patch of black ice on the sidewalk, knowing that one slip could shatter the fragile peace my father allowed us. I was the anomaly. When I was 12, I found a discarded desktop computer at a garage sale 3 blocks over. It was a beige monstrosity, yellowed by sunlight and caked in grime. I bought it with money I had saved from mowing lawns, dragging it home in a wagon like it was a treasure chest. My father laughed when he saw it sitting on the kitchen table. He called it a boat anchor. He told me I had wasted $10 on junk that would never turn on. He was wrong. I spent 3 weeks scouring library books, learning how to seat RAM and jumper a motherboard. When the screen finally flickered to life, glowing with a command prompt, I felt a rush of power that I had never felt watching my father pour concrete. I had created something from nothing, but when I ran to the garage to tell him, eager for even a crumb of validation, he didn't even look up from the transmission he was rebuilding. He just muttered that if I had that much free time, I should be helping Mom with the laundry. To him, technology was a toy for idle hands. It wasn't work. It was what you did when you were avoiding work. That dismissal became the soundtrack of my adolescence. It reached a crescendo the summer before I left for college. I had landed a full scholarship to Easton Tech, one of the premier engineering schools in the country. It was a ticket out of Maple Ridge, a golden pass I had earned through sleepless nights and perfect grades. We had a small barbecue to celebrate, or so I thought. My uncle and cousins were there, standing around a cooler of cheap beer in the backyard. When my uncle asked what I was going to study, I proudly said computer science and data analytics. My father snorted. flipping a burger with unnecessary aggression. He looked at his brother and said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, that I was going there to get a piece of paper so I could feel smart for 4 years. He told them that when I was done playing professor, I would come back to Maple Ridge and get a real job, maybe answering phones at the dealership or doing payroll for him. He framed my ambition as a temporary illness, something I would eventually recover from once the real world hit me. I remember staring at the fire in the grill, feeling the heat singe my eyelashes. I didn't say a word. I just learned, right then and there, that sharing my dreams with Ron Lane was like handing him a knife and asking him where to stab. So, I stopped sharing. During my 4 years at Easton, I lived 2 lives. In the version my parents knew, I was a struggling student scraping by. I told them I was busy with homework. I told them the city was expensive. I let them believe I was just another face in the crowd, drowning in academia. In reality, I was working harder than anyone in my family ever had, just in different ways. I didn't have the luxury of calling home for money when rent was due. I worked as a teaching assistant for the freshman Python course. I spent my weekends manning the help desk at the computer lab, resetting passwords for panicked sophomores. I picked up freelance gigs on freelance platforms, fixing broken e-commerce sites for bakeries in Ohio and car washes in Texas, writing code at 3 a.m. while my roommates slept. Meanwhile, back in Maple Ridge, the money I wasn't asking for was flowing freely to my brother, Ethan. Ethan was 2 years older and possessed all the charm and lack of foresight that my father admired. He wanted to open a bar, not just a bar, but a concept sports lounge in a town that barely had enough population to support a diner. My father thought it was a brilliant idea. He saw it as a legacy, something physical, something with a door you could unlock and a cash register you could open. I watched from a distance as my father drained his savings to renovate an old storefront for Ethan. I ate instant noodles and walked 2 miles to campus in the snow to save bus fare, while my father co-signed a loan for flat-screen televisions and neon signs for the End Zone, Ethan's bar. There was one moment, just one, where I almost broke my rule of silence. It was junior year. I had started building the prototype for what would become Lumisphere. I had been reading about the chaotic response to a hurricane in the Gulf Coast, how trucks full of water were sitting in parking lots, while people 50 miles away were dehydrated, simply because the data systems weren't talking to each other. I built a rudimentary algorithm that scraped weather data and road closures to predict supply chain bottlenecks. It was ugly code, but it worked. I was so excited, so consumed by the potential of it, that during a rare phone call home, I let it slip. I told Dad I was working on a system that could help FEMA save lives during disasters. I tried to explain the logic, the efficiency, the sheer scale of the problem I was solving. There was a long silence on the line. Then, he let out a tired sigh. He asked me if this project paid an hourly wage. I said no. It was research. It was a startup idea. He laughed, a dry, cracking sound. He told me to stop chasing sci-fi fantasies and worry about finding a job that offered health insurance and a pension. He said I was too old to be playing pretend. That was the last time I told him the truth. From that day forward, whenever they asked what I was doing, I gave them the most boring, soulless answer I could invent. I told them I was doing data entry for the university. It was a lie that satisfied his worldview. Data entry was tedious, low-paying, and subordinate. It made sense to him. He could picture me typing numbers into a spreadsheet, a cog in a machine, just like he was. It made him feel secure to think that my ceiling was lower than his. But in the shadows, I was building an empire. I met Marcus Reed in a hackathon during my junior year. He was a finance major with a minor in computer science, a rare hybrid who understood that code was just another form of currency. We brought in Lena Ortiz, a doctoral candidate who could optimize databases better than anyone I had ever met. We founded Lumisphere Analytics in the back room of a coffee shop that let us stay until 2 a.m. as long as we bought stale muffins. Those early days were brutal. There is a glamour to the idea of a startup, but the reality is grit. It was months of eating peanut butter out of the jar because we had spent our grocery money on cloud server fees. It was waking up at 4 in the morning to a crashing system, frantic that we had lost the data for our first pilot program with a small NGO in Haiti. It was rejection emails from venture capitalists that were so polite they felt like insults. I carried the weight of impending failure every single day. There were weeks when we were one invoice away from shutting down. I remember one night, staring at a bank account balance of $42, realizing I couldn't even afford a bus ticket home if I wanted to quit. The fear was paralyzing. But I couldn't tell my family. I couldn't call Mom and cry. I couldn't ask Dad for advice. If I told them I was struggling, Dad would have felt vindicated. He would have said, "I told you so." He would have used my failure as proof that his narrow, safe view of the world was the only correct one. So I swallowed the panic. I let it fuel me. I turned the fear of his judgment into code. And while I was holding my breath, hoping my company wouldn't die, my father was making his own financial moves. Ethan's bar, predictably, was failing. The concept was wrong. The location was bad. And Ethan was drinking more of the inventory than he was selling. But instead of letting Ethan learn a hard lesson, Dad doubled down. He called me one night, not to ask how I was, but to complain about the banks. He told me he was putting the house up as collateral to help Ethan open a second location in the next town over. He said the first one just needed synergy with a second branch to really take off. I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I was eating a slice of dollar pizza, celebrating closing a small contract that would keep Lumisphere's lights on for another month, and my father was gambling the roof over my mother's head on my brother's incompetence. He told me, with zero irony, that Ethan was a risk-taker, a businessman, and that families support each other's dreams. Then he asked if I was still doing that typing job at the school. I said yes. I said the typing was going fine. I hung up and went back to the lab. That night, we deployed the update that caught the attention of Northbridge Capital. That night, while my father was signing away his financial future to save his son's ego, I was quietly laying the groundwork to buy my own freedom. I lived in two parallel universes. In one, I was the disappointing daughter who fiddled with computers and refused to come home. In the other, I was the CEO of a company that was rewriting the protocols for global disaster response. The two worlds never touched. I kept them separated by a firewall of silence and omitted truths. Until today, until 5 minutes ago, until the text message that told me I was on my own, followed by the phone call that told me I owned everything. The official birth of Lumisphere Analytics did not happen in a boardroom with glass walls and ergonomic chairs. It happened in a windowless sublet basement apartment in Somerville that smelled perpetually of damp carpet and stale coffee. This was our headquarters. There were 4 of us. I was the CEO. Though the title felt ridiculous when I was wearing sweatpants and eating cereal for dinner, Marcus Reed was our CFO, a man who could make a spreadsheet sing but slept on a blow-up mattress in the corner of the room. Lena Ortiz, our chief technology officer, was a genius who thought in Python and dreamt in binary. She was the architect of the engine that would eventually power our platform. And then there was Sam Patel, no relation to me, who ran product. Sam was the translator, the one who took our complex algorithms and turned them into a dashboard that a tired government official could understand at 3 in the morning during a crisis. Those first 2 years were a lesson in controlled drowning. We were burning cash faster than we could find it. The servers required to process the massive data sets we were ingesting cost more than our collective rent. To keep the lights on, I took on a brutal schedule of side hustles. I taught introductory coding boot camps on weekends. I wrote white papers for boring insurance firms under a pseudonym. I consulted on database architecture for mid-sized logistics companies. Every single dollar I made went straight into the Lumisphere corporate account. I paid myself nothing. I lived on the free food from campus events and the sheer stubborn refusal to quit. And of course, I told my family absolutely none of this. To them, I was just a student who was taking a while to finish her degree because I was distracted. My father, Ron, had his own interpretation. He called me one Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of debugging a critical error in our geospatial mapping tool. "Alina," he said, skipping the greeting, I fired Mrs. Higgins today. She was messing up the payroll again. I am sorry to hear that, Dad, I said, typing with one hand while holding the phone with my shoulder. I was thinking, he continued, his voice taking on that tone of forced casualness he used when he was about to manipulate me. You are good with numbers. Why don't you come back to Maple Ridge? You can take over the books for Lane Construction. It is a steady gig. I can pay you $15 an hour. It is low, sure, but it is fixed. It is guaranteed, unlike whatever it is you are doing up there. I stopped typing. The offer was insulting, but the implication was worse. He truly believed he was saving me. He thought pulling me back to a dying town to manage the finances of a struggling company was a life raft. Dad, I can't, I said, keeping my voice even. I have commitments here. I have my studies. Commitments, he scoffed. You mean chasing fantasies. You are turning down a real job for pride. Alina, that is what it is. You think you are too good to work for your father. You think you are too good for this town. It is not about being too good, I said, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. It is about building something of my own. Selfish, he muttered before hanging up. Just selfish. The irony was that while he was calling me selfish, I was secretly keeping his household afloat. The construction business was slowing down. The economy in Maple Ridge was contracting, and people weren't building new decks or renovating kitchens. I knew this because Mom had let slip that they were behind on the medical bills from her gallbladder surgery. She mentioned it in a whisper. Terrified Dad would hear. 2 days later, I transferred $3,000 from my personal freelance savings, money I had earmarked for a new laptop, into a dormant bank account I had set up under the name the Maple Ridge Community Support Fund. From there, I sent a cashier's check to the hospital to clear Mom's balance. I included a typed letter saying she had been selected for a random community grant. When Mom called to tell me the miracle news, she was crying. She said God was watching over them. I didn't correct her. I did it again when the roof of our family home started leaking. $4,500 for materials and labor, paid anonymously. I did it again when the bank threatened to increase the interest rate on their credit line. I paid the principal down by $6,000, just enough to keep the wolves at bay. I was the invisible hand holding up the roof of the house I wasn't welcome in. Meanwhile, my father was taking every spare dime Lane Construction made and pouring it into a black hole named Ethan. My brother's bar, the end zone, was a disaster. Ethan had no head for business. He gave away free drinks to his friends, forgot to pay vendors, and alienated the locals by trying to turn a blue-collar watering hole into an upscale lounge with overpriced cocktails. But Dad wouldn't let him fail. To Dad, Ethan's struggle was noble. It was a man trying to build an empire. I watched from afar as Dad took out a second mortgage on the house, the same house I was paying to repair, to bail Ethan out. He signed the papers with pride, telling anyone who would listen that he was investing in the family legacy. When I tried to gently suggest that maybe Ethan should cut his losses, Dad exploded. He told me I was jealous. He told me I didn't understand loyalty. I channeled that rage into the only thing that mattered: Lumisphere. Our breakthrough happened in October. A massive hurricane was tracking toward the Florida coast. It was a monster storm, Category 4. The state agencies were scrambling. The Red Cross and other major NGOs were preparing for a logistical nightmare. Sam, our product lead, cold called the director of logistics for one of the largest relief organizations in the country. He told them we had a beta platform that could predict exactly where road networks would fail and where power grids would go down 48 hours before the storm hit. They were desperate enough to listen. They gave us a shot. We stayed awake for 96 hours straight. We fed real-time satellite data, traffic camera feeds, and even social media signals into our engine. While the storm was still raging, our system was telling the relief trucks exactly where to stage their supplies to avoid floodwaters that hadn't happened yet. The result was staggering. In previous storms, the average time to get critical aid like water and insulin to the hardest hit zones was 72 hours. With Lumisphere guiding the deployment, They did it in 18 hours. We saved lives. It wasn't abstract anymore. We had the data. People who would have been stranded without medicine got it because my code told a truck driver to take a left turn instead of a right one. The phone didn't stop ringing after that. Northbridge Capital, a top-tier venture capital firm in Boston, flew us out for a meeting. They put a term sheet on the table that made my head spin. They wanted to invest $12 million into Lumisphere. I sat in that boardroom, wearing a blazer I had bought at a thrift store, and negotiated like my life depended on it, because it did. I refused to give up control. I kept the voting rights. I kept the CEO seat. I walked out of that room with a deal that valued our little basement experiment at $40 million. That night, I went back to my dorm room. I still kept it for appearances, and turned on the TV. There was a segment on the evening news about the tech boom in disaster relief. They didn't mention Lumisphere by name, but they talked about data startups changing the game. My father was sitting in his recliner in Maple Ridge. I knew this because I had called to check on Mom. I could hear the TV in the background. "Did you see that, Ron?" Mom asked him. "They are talking about computers helping with the hurricane." I held my breath on the other end of the line. "Garbage," Dad grunted. "It is just another bubble. Deborah, a bunch of kids in hoodies pretending they know better than the people on the ground. It will all blow over in a month. It is fake money. Real value is in bricks, not bytes." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the signed term sheet on my desk. The ink still fresh. "Fake money," he said. But the road to the IPO wasn't a straight line. 6 months before graduation, we hit a wall. A government contract we were counting on got delayed due to a budget freeze in Washington. We had hired 50 engineers based on that contract. Suddenly, our burn rate was astronomical, and our cash flow was zero. Northbridge Capital got nervous. They didn't want to bridge the gap. They suggested layoffs. They suggested I step down as CEO and let an adult take over. I refused. I looked at the spreadsheet Marcus showed me. We needed $2 million to survive the quarter until the government funds unlocked. If we didn't get it, Lumisphere would die. I had one card left to play. I went to a private lender, a shark who specialized in high-risk bridge loans for distressed startups. The interest rate was predatory. The terms were brutal. To secure the loan, I had to personally guarantee it. I had to pledge my entire equity stake in Lumisphere as collateral. If the company failed, if the government contract didn't come through, if the market turned, I wouldn't just be unemployed. I would lose everything. I would lose the company I built. I would be buried in debt so deep I would never crawl out. I would prove my father right. I sat in the lawyer's office with the pen in my hand. My hand was shaking. I thought about the safe, $15 an hour job at Lane Construction. I thought about the stability my father worshipped. Then I thought about the 18 hours. I thought about the lives we saved in Florida. I thought about the check I sent to save my mother's health. I signed the paper. I walked out onto the street, the cold Boston wind hitting my face. I had just bet my entire future on a single quarter. I was walking on a tightrope over a canyon, with no safety net, and the only person in the world who should have been there to catch me was the one man waiting for me to fall. I never told them. I never told anyone in my family that for 3 agonizing months, I was technically bankrupt and fighting for my life. I just kept sending the anonymous checks to Maple Ridge, kept listening to Dad brag about Ethan's failing bar, and kept waiting for the moment when I could finally stop pretending. The gamble paid off. The bridge loan I had signed in blood was the fuel we needed, and the government contract that had been frozen finally thawed. When it did, it didn't just trickle in. It flooded that spring. The Midwest saw historic flooding, and California's wildfire season started 2 months early. Every state emergency agency was looking for a solution, and Lumisphere was the only platform that was ready. We weren't just a tool anymore. We became the standard operating procedure. If a governor wanted to know where to send the National Guard, they looked at my dashboard. Our revenue graph went vertical. It looked less like a business growth chart and more like a rocket trajectory. The business press started sniffing around. I saw my company's name in the Wall Street Journal for the first time while I was eating a bagel in the campus dining hall. They called us the invisible nervous system of disaster relief. That was when the board of directors and Northbridge Capital decided it was time. We were going to go public. The meeting where we decided to launch the initial public offering was surreal. We were sitting in a conference room that cost more per hour to rent than my father made in a month. The investment bankers from New York were throwing around numbers that sounded like coordinates to a distant galaxy. They weren't talking about millions anymore. Based on the current subscription interest and the tech multiple, the lead underwriter said, adjusting his silk tie, we are looking at an opening valuation north of $6 billion. $6 billion. I sat at the head of the table, keeping my face perfectly neutral, but under the mahogany surface, my hands were gripping my knees so hard, my fingernails were digging into the denim of my jeans. $6 billion was not a number. It was a weapon. It was enough money to buy Maple Ridge 10 times over. It was enough to rewrite history. The next 3 weeks were a blur of schizophrenia. I was living a double life that was becoming impossible to sustain. By day, I was Alina Patel, the quiet senior finishing her final credits, dodging questions about her post-graduation plans. By night, and often during skipped classes, I was the CEO on a roadshow. Marcus and I flew across the country in private jets chartered by the banks, pitching Lumisphere to the biggest institutional investors in the world. We sat in boardrooms in San Francisco, Chicago, and London, explaining our margins and our mission. I wore a tailored suit for the meetings, then changed into a hoodie in the airport bathroom before flying back to Boston to take a midterm exam on data structures. I was exhausted. My eyes were permanently gritty from lack of sleep, but the adrenaline was intoxicating. Every handshake, every signature, every nod from a fund manager brought us closer to the bell. Then came the scheduling conflict. The bankers and the stock exchange wanted to list us on a Tuesday in mid-May. It was the optimal window for the market. It also happened to be the exact same day as the Easton Tech graduation ceremony. It is perfect, Alana Cruz, our new head of public relations, told me. She was pacing around my office, her eyes lighting up. The narrative writes itself. Alina, the student CEO, you walk across the stage to get your diploma in the morning, and you ring the opening bell remotely from the stadium. By the time you throw your cap in the air, you will be the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country. It is gold. The press will eat it up. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My parents will be there, I said quietly. Alana stopped pacing. Do they know? No, I said. They think I am unemployed. Alana looked at me like I was an alien species she hadn't encountered before. Well, she said slowly, they are going to find out. We can't keep an IPO secret. Alina, once the S1 filing goes public, your name is out there. It is going to be everywhere. She was right. The clock was ticking. I had to make a choice. I could uninvite them, come up with some lie about limited tickets, and keep the world separate for one more day. Or I could invite them and let the collision happen. I spent 2 nights staring at the ceiling, debating it. Part of me wanted to protect them, or perhaps protect myself from the shock. But a deeper, more wounded part of me wanted them to see it. I wanted my father to sit in that stadium and watch. I wanted to give him one last chance to see me, really see me, before the rest of the world told him who I was. I sent the invitation. I called home on a Sunday, Dad answered, sounding out of breath. He was probably working on the truck again. Graduation, he said, the word heavy with disinterest when I told him the date. That is a long drive. Alina, gas is up to $4 a gallon again, and your mother's legs aren't great for stadium stairs. I would really like you to be there. Dad, I said, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted it to. It is a big day. He sighed, a long, rattling sound. Fine, we will come, but we are doing it for the family. You understand? We have to keep up appearances. Your aunt wants pictures to put on Facebook, but don't expect a party. And Alina? Yes? Don't think this piece of paper makes you special, he said. his voice dropping into that familiar lecture mode. I talked to the neighbors. Their son graduated last year, got a fancy degree, and now he is working at a coffee shop. The real world doesn't care about your grades. So when you are sitting there in that gown, you better be thinking about how you're going to pay your own rent, because I am done carrying you. I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it. He was done carrying me, the man whose mortgage I had secretly paid down, the man whose wife's surgery I had funded. "Okay, Dad," I said. "I will see you there." The night before graduation, the night before the IPO, I didn't sleep at all. I was in a hotel suite in downtown Boston with Marcus and the legal team. We were on the pricing call. This was the final step. The bankers were on the speakerphone, confirming the final order book. "Demand is oversubscribed by 20 times, the voice on the phone said. "We are pricing the shares at $28. That puts the initial market cap at $6.4 billion. The room erupted. Marcus punched the air. The lawyers high-fived. Champagne corks popped. I sat in the corner, looking out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, my parents were sleeping. They had driven up that afternoon. They had no idea that the daughter they were coming to tolerate tomorrow was currently sitting in a room filled with people who were toasting her as a visionary. I felt a profound sense of loneliness. This should have been the moment I called my dad. This should have been the moment I screamed. "We did it!" But I knew that if I called him, he would ask me why I was awake so late and tell me to stop acting like a big shot. I walked over to Marcus. He handed me a glass of champagne, his eyes wide. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "The market opens at 9:30. You will be in the middle of the ceremony." "I will have my phone," I said. "Alana has the press release queued up," Marcus said. "The second the bell rings, the embargo lifts, every news outlet in America gets the story." "Okay," I said. "Alina," Marcus said, his voice turning serious. "You know your life changes tomorrow, right? There is no going back to anonymous after this." "I know," I said. "I am counting on it." The morning of the ceremony was gray and humid. I put on the black gown and the square cap. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a CEO. I looked like a girl from Maple Ridge who was trying too hard. I took an Uber to the stadium. I met up with my classmates, standing in the staging tunnels. The air was filled with nervous chatter about student loans and job interviews. "I am hoping to get an internship at a bank," the girl next to me whispered. "My dad says if I don't get a job in 3 months, I have to move home." I nodded sympathetically, clutching my phone. The market would open in 45 minutes. I found my seat in row 42. I watched the families filing into the bleachers. I spotted them eventually. My father was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, looking uncomfortable and annoyed. My mother was next to him, looking small and tired. They weren't smiling. They weren't looking for me. They were just enduring it. I checked my phone. 9:15. 15 minutes to market open. Then the message came. I felt the vibration before I saw the screen. I knew it was him. He must have just sat down, looked at the program, and felt the need to establish dominance one last time before the ceremony began. "Don't expect help. You are on your own for the rest of your life." I stared at the words. I read them over and over again. For years, I had been afraid of this sentiment. I had worked myself to the bone to avoid it. I had built a company, saved lives, and made a fortune, all in a subconscious attempt to prove that I wasn't helpless. But as I read the text this time, something snapped. It wasn't a snap of breakage, it was a snap of alignment. He was releasing me. He thought he was abandoning me, but he was actually setting me free. He was declaring that he owed me nothing, which meant I owed him nothing. The debt was paid. The obligation was severed. I looked up from the phone and found him in the crowd again. He was looking at his watch, probably calculating how soon they could leave. "You are right, Dad," I thought, a cold calm washing over me. "I am on my own, and you have no idea how powerful that makes me." I didn't reply. I didn't cry. I simply swiped the notification away and opened my stock market app. The countdown clock on the screen showed 2 minutes to the opening bell. I took a deep breath. The girl who needed Ron Lane's approval died in that chair. The woman who was about to run a $6 billion public company was just waking up. "Let's do this," I whispered. And then, the phone rang. The dean was midway through a sentence about the responsibility of the modern intellectual when my phone vibrated against my palm. It wasn't a polite notification buzz. It was a long, sustained tremor that traveled all the way up my arm, settling into the base of my neck. I looked down. The screen was glowing in the shadow of my black graduation gown. Marcus Reed, CFO. The time displayed was 9:32 in the morning. The New York Stock Exchange had been open for exactly 2 minutes. My heart did something violent in my chest. It felt less like a beat and more like a collision. I looked around. The stadium was a sea of hushed reverence. 3,000 students were sitting in dutiful silence. Parents were fanning themselves in the bleachers. The air was still, broken only by the rhythmic drone of the dean's voice amplifying over the loudspeakers. I should not answer this. That was the rational thought. I was in the middle of a ceremony. My father was watching from the stands, probably already composing a mental list of grievances about my posture or my hair. Answering a phone call during the commencement speech was the ultimate act of disrespect, the kind of thing that would confirm every negative thing he had ever said about my generation. But the vibration didn't stop. It was persistent, urgent, demanding. I knew Marcus. He was a man of spreadsheets and calculated risks. He wouldn't call me 2 minutes into the trading session unless the building was on fire or we had just made history. I made a split-second decision. I hunched forward, pulling my knees up slightly, and draped the heavy sleeve of my gown over the phone, creating a small, dark tent of privacy. I pressed the phone to my ear, keeping my head bowed low as if I were overcome with emotion. "Marcus," I whispered. My voice was barely a breath. "I am at graduation. The dean is talking." "Alina!" Marcus's voice exploded out of the speaker. I hadn't realized my volume was turned up to the maximum level. His shout was so loud, so filled with raw, unfiltered adrenaline, that I flinched physically, pulling the phone an inch away from my ear. "We popped!" Marcus screamed. He wasn't speaking. He was yelling over a background noise that sounded like a riot. I could hear cheering, bells ringing, and the chaotic roar of a trading floor. "The opening cross just cleared. Are you watching the ticker?" "No," I hissed, pressing the phone back against my ear, desperate to muffle him. "I am in a stadium. Marcus, keep your voice down." "I can't keep it down," he yelled back, his voice cracking with hysteria. "We priced at 28, but the demand was insane. The opening trade just hit the tape. $34. Alina, we opened at $34 a share." My breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. $34. I did the math instantly. It was a reflex. We had 75 million outstanding shares. If the stock was trading at $34, that puts the valuation at, I started to whisper, my mind reeling. $2.5 billion in floating capital alone, Marcus cut in. Breathless now. But total market cap? Alina, we are trading at $6.4 billion right now. $6.4 billion. The stock is vertical. It is halting for volatility because everyone is trying to buy in. You are not just a unicorn anymore. You are a titan. I sat frozen. The concrete ground beneath my feet felt like it had dissolved. $6 billion. The number was abstract, too large to hold in my head, yet it was terrifyingly real. "Alina?" Marcus shouted again. "Did you hear me? The press release just went out. CNBC is running the banner. They are calling it the graduation IPO. You are trending on Twitter right now." I tried to shush him again, but my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the device, and then I realized the mistake I had made. The acoustics of the stadium were designed to carry sound, but the seating arrangement was tight. The students were packed shoulder to shoulder, and in the quiet lull between the dean's sentences, the tinny, high-pitched excitement of Marcus's voice wasn't contained by my sleeve. It leaked out. It drifted into the stagnant air around row 42. $6.4 billion. Marcus's voice rang out from my lap, clear as a bell in the silence. The woman sitting directly behind me, a mother who had been crying softly over her son's achievement, stopped sniffling. I felt her freeze. "Did that phone just say billion?" she whispered to her husband. Her voice carried the sharp edge of confusion. To my right, Jessica, a girl I had sat next to in thermodynamics for an entire semester, turned her head slowly. Jessica knew me as the girl who wore hoodies and sometimes fell asleep in the back row. She knew me as the quiet student who never came to parties because I was busy. She looked at my hunched form, at the phone glowing under my sleeve, and her eyes went wide. "Alina?" Jessica whispered. She tugged at the fabric of my gown. "What is going on? Who is that?" I ignored her, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Marcus," I whispered into the phone, panic rising in my throat. "I have to go. People can hear you." "Let them hear," Marcus laughed, a manic sound. "You own 51% of the voting stock. Alina, you just made $3 billion in 3 minutes. Who cares if they hear? Stand up and take a bow." "$3 billion?" the student on my left echoed. He wasn't whispering. He had pulled his own phone out and was frantically typing something. The ripple effect was immediate. It started as a murmur in my row, then spread outward like a shockwave. Heads were turning. People were leaning in. The solemn gravity of the graduation ceremony was breaking down in a pocket of chaos centered directly on me. "Is it crypto?" someone behind me asked. "No, shut up. Listen," someone else hissed. "She is the CEO. Look at her phone." I looked up, desperate to escape, and that was when I saw them. My parents. They weren't where they had been 10 minutes ago. They had moved down from the nosebleed section. My father was pushing his way through the standing room area near the railing, about 20 feet away from my row. He was frowning, his brow furrowed in that familiar expression of disappointment. He had seen me on the phone. To Ron Lane. This was the ultimate confirmation of my failure. Here I was, at the most important moment of my academic life, and I couldn't even pay attention. I was probably playing a game. I was probably texting. I was being unfocused. He locked eyes with me. Even from this distance, I could feel the heat of his judgment. He mouthed something. It looked like, "Put it away." But then he stopped. He stopped because he noticed that I wasn't the only one distracted. He saw Jessica staring at me with her mouth open. He saw the student to my left holding up his phone to record me. He saw the couple behind me standing up to get a better look at the girl who had a screaming CFO in her lap. Dad paused, his hand gripping the metal railing. Confusion flickered across his face, replacing the anger. He looked at my mother, who was clutching her purse nervously, then back at me. He could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The air around me wasn't filled with the boredom of a ceremony anymore. It was charged with electricity. "Alina," Marcus said in my ear, his voice suddenly serious. "Alana is texting me. The reporters are at the gate. They know you are inside. They are going to be waiting for you when you walk off that field." I looked at my father. He was inching closer, his eyes narrowing, trying to understand why his daughter, the girl he had told to expect no help, was suddenly the center of gravity for an entire section of the stadium. "I have to hang up," I said, my voice trembling. "Do not run from this," Marcus said. "Own it." I tapped the red icon to end the call. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. But it wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. Jessica was still staring at me. "Alina," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "My boyfriend just sent me a link. Is this you? Is this Lumisphere?" She held up her phone. On the screen was a live chart from Yahoo Finance. The ticker symbol was LMSH. The line was green and pointing almost straight up, and right next to the chart was a thumbnail image. It was a photo of me, a grainy photo from a hackathon 2 years ago, but undeniably me. The headline read, "The Dorm Room Billionaire. Who is Alina Patel?" I looked at the screen. Then I looked up at my father. He was close enough now to see the phone Jessica was holding. He was close enough to see the way people were looking at me. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with awe. The two parallel lines of my life, the disappointing daughter and the tech titan, had just crashed into each other. There was no smoke, no fire, but the impact was violent enough to shatter everything that had come before. I slowly lowered my hand, letting the sleeve of my gown fall back. I sat up straight. My father was 10 feet away. He looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. He didn't know the numbers yet. He didn't know the details, but he knew, with the instinct of a man who watches structures for a living, that the foundation of his world had just shifted. He opened his mouth to speak, to scold, to demand an explanation. But before he could get a word out, the student to my left, the one who had been recording, leaned over and shouted, oblivious to the ceremony, "Holy cow, she's the founder! Hey, everyone, she is the one on the news." The whisper turned into a roar, and Ron Lane, the man who had told me I was on my own, stood frozen as the wave of realization came crashing down on his head. The phone in my lap buzzed again, a violent, insistent spasm against my leg. I stared at the screen. Alana Cruz, head of PR. My stomach turned over. Alana was a former crisis manager for a senator. She did not call for casual chats. If she was calling me now, while I was supposedly unreachable, it meant the media firewall had breached. The story was moving faster than the press release. The narrative was slipping out of our control. And in the world of high-stakes IPOs, a narrative without a driver is a car crash waiting to happen. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the green icon. "Turn that off immediately." The voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. It wasn't the dean. It wasn't a professor. It was my father. Ron Lane was standing in the aisle, gripping the back of the folding chair in row 41 so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the stage. He wasn't looking at the other parents. He was glaring directly at me, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "You are making a spectacle of yourself," he hissed, his voice loud enough that the 3 rows surrounding us went dead silent. "Put the damn phone away. What kind of game are you playing here, Alina?" He looked at me with the same expression he used to wear when he found me reading coding manuals at the dinner table, a look that said I was wasting his time, that I was frivolous, that I was disrespectful of the serious business of living. To him, I was just a child fidgeting in church. I looked at him, then I looked at the phone. If I declined the call, I would be obeying him. I would be sliding back into the box he had built for me, the box where Alina Lane was a quiet, obedient disappointment who needed to be told how the real world worked. If I silenced Alana, I was letting him write the end of this chapter. But if I answered, a strange, cold clarity settled over me. It was the same feeling I had when I signed the bridge loan, the same feeling I had when I first pitched to Northbridge Capital. It was the realization that the only way out was through. I didn't just slide the bar to answer. I pressed the speaker button. I held the phone up, not to my ear, but out in the open, cradling it in my palm like an offering. It was a declaration of war. "Alina!" Alana's voice rang out, crisp, professional, and amplified. It sliced through the humid air of the stadium, bouncing off the plastic seats and the stunned faces of my classmates. "Thank God you picked up. We have a situation." My father froze. His mouth, which had been opened to deliver another reprimand, snapped shut. He stared at the device in my hand as if it were a grenade. "What is the situation, Alana?" I asked. My voice was steady, louder than I intended. I wasn't whispering anymore. "We are everywhere," Alana said, and her voice carried a frenetic energy that electrified the space around us. "The embargo lifted 3 minutes ago. We are the banner headline on Bloomberg, CNBC, and the Wall Street Journal. The press is calling you the founder behind the disaster relief app that changed the game. They are running the B-roll footage from the Florida hurricane response." The silence in our section of the stadium was absolute. The dean was still droning on in the distance, but no one near row 42 was listening to him. Every eye was fixed on me. Every ear was strained to catch the voice coming from my hand.
Okay, I said. What about the stock?
It is a frenzy, Alana continued, her voice rising. The valuation just touched $6.4 billion. The trading had to be halted for 5 minutes because of the order imbalance. Institutional investors are fighting to get a position. You are officially the biggest story in the country right now. $6.4 billion. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. A gasp rippled through the rows behind me. It wasn't a single person. It was a collective intake of breath. The words billion and founder acted like a physical shockwave. Did she say billion? A father in a blue polo shirt whispered loudly. That is the girl, a student 2 seats down muttered, holding his phone up high to livestream the moment. That is Alina Patel. I am in her calc class. She is the CEO. The atmosphere shifted instantly. It went from a graduation ceremony to a spectator sport. Phones shot up like lighters at a concert. The lenses weren't pointed at the stage. They were pointed at me. I could feel the heat of the attention, the sudden, terrifying shift in status. I wasn't just a graduate anymore. I was a phenomenon. But I wasn't looking at the cameras. I was looking at my father. Ron Lane looked like he had been struck by a physical blow. He was standing there, blinking rapidly, his face draining of color. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, devastating confusion. He looked at the phone, then at me, then at the people filming us. He was trying to process the math. He was trying to reconcile the daughter he had told to get a real job with the voice on the speakerphone talking about billions of dollars. But Alana wasn't done, and the next thing she said was the dagger that would cut the deepest. Also, Alina, Alana said, her tone shifting to something softer, more administrative. We have an incoming inquiry from the mayor's office in Maple Ridge. They saw the news and put 2 and 2 together. My father's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been darting around in panic, locked onto mine. The mayor sent an email to our general inquiry inbox, Alana continued, oblivious to the fact that she was broadcasting to an audience. He wants to issue a formal thank you. He says the anonymous donations made to the Community Support Fund over the last 3 years kept the town library open and paid for the new roof on the Veterans Center. He is asking if we can confirm that the donor was actually you. The air left my father's lungs. I saw it happen. His chest collapsed. He knew about the Community Support Fund. Of course he did. He had received checks from it. He had cashed checks from it to pay for the medical bills he couldn't afford. He had used money from that fund to save his business from bankruptcy twice in the last 18 months. He had spent years bragging to his friends that someone up there was looking out for the honest working man. He had told me, to my face, that I should be more like the anonymous donors who cared about their community, instead of running off to the city to play with computers. And now, the voice on the phone was telling him that the savior he worshipped and the daughter he despised were the exact same person. He looked at me with a horror that was almost pitying. The realization was rewriting his entire history of the last 3 years. Every meal he had eaten, every bill he had paid, every night he had slept soundly under a repaired roof. It had all been a gift from me. A gift I had given while he was busy telling me I was useless. Alina? Alana asked, the silence stretching too long. Do we confirm? It is a great human interest angle. I looked at my dad. He looked small. He looked old. The bluster, the arrogance, the head of the household bravado. It had all evaporated, leaving behind a man who was suddenly standing on a foundation of sand. Alana, I said, leaning into the phone, my eyes never leaving my father's face. I am currently sitting in the middle of my graduation ceremony, and my parents are standing right in front of me. They are listening to everything you are saying. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of professional recalibration. Alana Cruz was a pro. She didn't stumble. She didn't apologize. She pivoted. Oh, Alana said, her voice warming with a practiced, polished charm. Well, in that case, please pass on my congratulations, Mr. And Mrs. Lane must be incredibly proud. They raised a daughter who didn't just build a unicorn company, but who used her success to quietly save her hometown. That is a rare thing. Congratulations to the whole family. The irony was acidic, proud. The word hung there, mocking him. From somewhere in the back of the section, a single person started clapping. It was a slow, solitary sound. Then, another person joined in. Then another. It wasn't polite applause. It was the kind of applause that builds when people realize they are witnessing a moment of justice. The student to my left started clapping and cheering. Jessica stood up and clapped. The parents in the row behind me, the ones who had whispered about the billions, stood up too. The sound swelled. It wasn't for the graduation. It wasn't for the dean. It was for the reveal. It was for the girl who had just publicly stripped the armor off the man who had doubted her. My father stood frozen in the center of the applause. He looked around, bewildered. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that the applause wasn't for him. It was a wall of sound separating him from me. He tried to take a step toward me, perhaps to say something, perhaps to reclaim some scrap of authority, but he couldn't. He was drowning in the noise. He looked at his hands, then at his wife. My mother was covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, terrifying vindication. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look at Dad for permission to feel what she was feeling. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held the phone, the link to my real world, and watched as the power dynamic of my family disintegrated in real time, broadcast live to a stadium of strangers.
We will talk later. Alana, I said, and I tapped the red button.
The call ended, but the applause didn't stop. And in the middle of it all, Ron Lane stood with his mouth slightly open, a king whose kingdom had just been revealed to be a charity case funded by the very subject he had exiled. The connection with Alana severed, leaving a sudden, ringing silence in the wake of the electronic applause. The students around me were still buzzing, their whispers acting like a static field, but the world had effectively shrunk down to a 3-foot radius around row 42. I turned my body fully. For the first time in 22 years, I didn't angle my shoulders inward to make myself smaller. I didn't look at his shoes or the scuff marks on the concrete floor. I looked directly into Ron Lane's eyes. He looked like a man who had walked into a room he thought he knew, only to find the furniture bolted to the ceiling. His face was a map of fractured certainties, the anger that had propelled him down the stairs moments ago, the righteous indignation of a father coming to discipline an unruly child, was gone. In its place was a jagged, terrified confusion. "What is this, Alina?" he asked. His voice was unrecognizable. It was raspy, stripped of the booming bass that had dictated the terms of my existence since birth. "Is this a joke? Did you get someone to call you? What are you playing at?" He was grasping for a lifeline. He wanted me to tell him it was a prank. He wanted me to say it was a simulation for a class project. He needed the world to make sense again. "It is not a joke, Dad," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. It wasn't the voice of his daughter. It was the voice of the woman who had stared down venture capitalists and negotiated with federal agencies. "It is a public company. I am the co-founder and CEO of Lumisphere Analytics. We just listed on the New York Stock Exchange." He blinked, his eyes darting to the phone I was still holding, then back to my face. "You?" he sputtered. "But you are a student. You fix computers. You don't run a company." "I have been running it for 3 years," I corrected him. "While you were telling me I was wasting my time, while you were telling me I needed to learn what real work was, I was building this." He recoiled as if I had slapped him. But then, the defense mechanism kicked in. I saw the familiar wall go up behind his eyes. The wall of "Father knows best." He couldn't accept that he was wrong, so he had to make my success wrong. "It is a bubble," he said, his voice gaining a little bit of its old friction. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "I have seen this before. It is gambling. Alina, it is not real money. You are going to get hurt. I want you to be safe. That is all I have ever said. I told you to get a job with benefits so you wouldn't have to deal with this risk." He was trying to frame his dismissal as protection. He was trying to rewrite his cruelty as caution. "Safe," I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. "You didn't want me safe, Dad. You wanted me small." "That is not true," he protested, looking around to see if anyone was listening. But he was too late. Everyone was listening. "I am your father. I provide for this family. I know how hard the world is. You think some numbers on a screen make you secure? What happens when the market crashes? Who is going to pay the bills then?" I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It was the moment I had been waiting for. Not to hurt him, but to heal the truth. "The bills," I said softly. "Let's talk about the bills." I unlocked my phone again. I didn't open the stock ticker. I didn't open the bank account with the millions of dollars that had just vested. I opened my personal checking account, the one attached to the freelance work, the teaching gigs, and the early dividends I had scraped together. I tapped on the search bar and typed in Maple Ridge. "Come here," I said. It wasn't a request. My mother stepped forward first. She was trembling, clutching her handbag with both hands. Dad followed, moving like he was walking underwater. I turned the screen toward them. "Look at the dates," I said, pointing to the list of transactions. "November 12th, 2 years ago, $3,200, sent to the Maple Ridge Community Support Fund." Dad squinted. He knew that date. "That was the week Mom had her gallbladder surgery," I said, my voice low and hard. "The insurance didn't cover the deductible. You were going to sell your truck to pay for it. Then, suddenly, the hospital called and said an anonymous donor had covered the balance. Do you remember?" Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at the glowing number. I scrolled down. "March 4th, last year, $4,500. The roof on the house, it was leaking into the attic. You told me you were going to patch it with tar because you couldn't afford a contractor. Then, a grant came through from the community fund specifically for home repairs." I looked at him. That was me. "Dad, I paid for the shingles over your head." I scrolled again. "And this one. This is the big one. January of this year. Lane Construction was about to default on the equipment loan for the excavators. The bank was threatening to seize them. You were terrified. You stopped eating. Then, miraculously, the bank called. Someone had bought the debt and restructured it with 0 interest for 12 months. I lowered the phone. "I bought the debt. Dad, I own the note on your excavators. I saved your company." The silence that followed was heavier than the stadium itself. It was a silence that crushed the last remnants of his ego. He looked at the phone. He looked at the list of transactions. Thousands and thousands of dollars, sent by the daughter he had called a dreamer, a slacker, a disappointment. He had taken that money. He had spent that money. He had thanked God for that money, and all the while, he had looked me in the eye and told me I was useless. "You," he whispered, "all this time?" "All this time," I said. "You stood in the kitchen and told me I didn't know what it meant to support a family. You told me I was selfish for staying in Boston. But the truth is, I was the only one keeping the family afloat. I just didn't want to shame you by telling you." My mother let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. "Alina," she whispered. "Why? Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us treat you like that?" I turned to my mother. My expression softened, but the pain was still there, sharp and bright. "Because I knew what would happen," I said. "If I told you I was making money with computers, Dad would have said it wasn't real work. If I told you I was building a company, he would have said I was gambling. He would have cut me down. He would have found a way to make my success feel like a failure because it didn't look like his success." I looked back at my father. He was staring at the ground now. He looked physically smaller, as if the air had been let out of him. His shoulders were slumped. The narrative he had told himself for 20 years, that he was the martyr, the provider, the strong man carrying the weak women, had evaporated. He wasn't the provider. He was the beneficiary.
He looked up at me, his eyes wet. He looked lost. For the first time, I didn't see the tyrant. I saw a man who was obsolete, and he knew it. He stammered, his voice breaking. I just wanted what was best for you. Alina, I didn't want you to struggle like I did. I thought I was guiding you.
It was the excuse of every parent who crushes their child's spirit in the name of love. It was a shield, and I wasn't going to let him hide behind it anymore.
No. Dad, I said. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream in his ears. You didn't want what was best for me. You wanted what was best for your image of me. You wanted a daughter who was safe, small, and dependent, because that made you feel big. You never looked at who I actually am. You never asked what I could do. You just decided I couldn't do anything. He flinched. The truth hit him harder than the billion-dollar valuation. I am not the girl you think needs saving, I said, straightening up and pulling my graduation gown tight around me. I am the one who does the saving, and you need to accept that, or you need to walk away. But you don't get to stand there and tell me I am on my own anymore, because clearly, I am the only one who has ever really been on my own. I held his gaze for 1 second longer, long enough to see the surrender in his eyes, and then I turned away. I looked toward the stage, where the ceremony was continuing, oblivious to the fact that a family had just died and been reborn in row 42. The silence between us was vibrating with the energy of 1,000 unspoken apologies and 1,000,000 shattered assumptions. My father was staring at his shoes, the scuff marks on the leather suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. My mother was wiping her eyes with a tissue she had pulled from her sleeve. The people around us were pretending not to watch, but I could feel their gaze like physical touch. They were waiting for the encore. They were waiting for the hug, the reconciliation, the made-for-TV ending where the misunderstood genius forgives the skeptical parents. But life is not a movie, and business does not wait for sentimentality. My phone buzzed again. It was a rapid-fire sequence of vibrations, a staccato rhythm that I recognized immediately. It was the decision-required signal Marcus used when a time-sensitive deal was on the table. I looked down. Marcus Reed. I stepped back, creating a small buffer of air between me and my parents. I did not put it on speaker this time. This conversation was not for the public. This was the kind of conversation that happens in soundproof rooms with frosted glass walls. Marcus, I said, my voice low and devoid of the tremble that had been there minutes ago. I am here. Alina, Marcus said. The hysteria of the IPO opening was gone from his voice, replaced by the razor-sharp precision of a CFO closing a loop. We just got the confirmation wire from the legal team in Chicago. The acquisition of the distressed asset portfolio from Maple Ridge Community Bank is complete. The ink is dry. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the stadium. Explain it to me, I said, keeping my eyes on my father's slumped shoulders. In plain English, what exactly do we own? Okay, Marcus said. Here's the short version. We set up that special purpose vehicle, the SPV, last month to buy up local debt in the towns where our disaster relief hubs are located. It is part of the Corporate Responsibility Initiative to stabilize local economies. We bought a bundle of bad loans from your hometown bank this morning for 40 cents on the dollar. He paused, letting the weight of the next sentence build. Alina, the primary asset in that bundle is a commercial line of credit and a bloated mortgage attached to a company called Lane Construction. The borrower is Ron Lane. I closed my eyes for a second. I knew it was bad. I knew Dad was struggling. That was why I had been sending the anonymous checks. But I hadn't realized how deep the rot went until this moment. What is the status of the loan? I asked. It is toxic, Marcus said bluntly. He is 90 days past due on the interest payments. He has leveraged the company assets to 110% of their value. Under the terms of the original loan, the bank could have foreclosed last Tuesday. They were just waiting for the quarter to end to write it off. But now the bank doesn't hold the note anymore. We do, I whispered. The SPV does, Marcus corrected.
which means Lumisphere does, which means you do. I opened my eyes and looked at my father. He was shifting his weight from one foot to the other, looking like a man who wanted to disappear. He thought his biggest problem was embarrassment. He thought the worst thing that had happened today was finding out his daughter was richer than he was. He had no idea. He didn't know that the invisible hand that had been holding back the executioner's axe was mine. He didn't know that the very machinery of his life, the excavators, the trucks, the office building with the peeling paint, the payroll account for his 12 employees, was now property of the daughter he had told to expect no help. "So," Marcus said, his voice practical, "we have a decision to make. Standard protocol for an asset this distressed is liquidation. We seize the collateral, auction the equipment to recoup the 40 cents, and shut the operation down. It is the cleanest financial move." "No," I said instantly. "I figured you would say that," Marcus said. "Option B is restructuring. We convert the debt into equity. We take a controlling interest in the company. We install a new financial controller to stop the bleeding. We keep the business running. We keep the workers employed. But Ron Lane, well, he stops being the king. He becomes an employee. He loses signing authority on the checks." I stared at the back of my father's head. I thought about the men who worked for him. I thought about Mr. Henderson, the foreman who had given me a candy bar every time I visited the site as a kid. I thought about the families in Maple Ridge who depended on those paychecks. If I let the company fail, I would be punishing them for my father's arrogance. But if I saved it the way I had been saving it, anonymously, silently, nothing would change. He would continue to believe he was the master of his universe. He would continue to gamble on Ethan's bad ideas. He would continue to look down on me. "Option B," I said, "but with conditions." "Name them," Marcus said. "First," I said, my voice hardening, "no layoffs. The crew stays. We protect the payroll for the next 12 months, guaranteed. Second, the house. The lien on the family home gets severed from the business debt. We put the house into a trust for my mother. It becomes untouchable. If the business goes under later, Mom doesn't lose her roof." "Done," Marcus said. "And the third condition?" "Dad," I said. "He stays on as the operational manager. He knows the work. He knows the clients. But he loses financial control. He doesn't get to sign checks over $500 without approval from the board. And the board is me." There was a pause on the line. I could hear Marcus typing something. "Alina," he said softly, "you know what this means, right? You are effectively seizing his company. You are putting your father on an allowance." "I am stopping him from drowning," I said. "He just won't like the life raft." "Okay," Marcus said. "I am executing the paperwork now. By the time he gets back to Indiana, there will be a legal courier waiting at his office with the restructuring agreement. He signs, or we foreclose. Those are the choices." "Do it," I said. "Copy that. Congratulations. Alina, you just bought your freedom." I hung up the phone. The air around me felt different now. Before, it had been heavy with emotion. Now, it was crisp with the cold clarity of leverage. I walked back to where my parents were standing. My father looked up. He looked wary, like a dog that had been kicked and wasn't sure if another blow was coming. He saw the expression on my face, and he flinched. He expected anger. He expected me to scream at him, to list his failures, to demand an apology for every hurtful text message and every dismissive comment. But I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger implies that the other person has power over you. Anger implies that you are fighting to be heard. I didn't need to fight. I held the deed. "Who was that?" Dad asked, his voice rough. "More reporters?" "No," I said. "That was my legal team." "Legal team?" He frowned. "For what?" I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the lines of stress etched around his eyes. I saw the gray in his stubble. I saw a man who had spent his entire life trying to be the strong provider, terrified that if he stopped working for even a second, the world would eat him alive. He had projected that fear onto me. He had tried to beat the softness out of me because he thought softness was death.
He didn't realize that softness wasn't my weakness. It was my disguise. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a gavel strike. "We need to talk about lane construction."
He stiffened. What about it? The business is fine. We are going through a dry patch. That is all. It is seasonal. It is not seasonal, I said. You are in default. The bank sold your note this morning.
His face went gray. How do you know that?"
Because I bought it, I said. The world stopped. The marching band music, the cheering graduates, the humid wind. It all fell away. There was only the look of absolute shattering comprehension on his face.
"You what?" he whispered.
Lumisphere has a community investment arm, I said, keeping the explanation simple, using the language of business that he respected so much. We buy distressed debt in vulnerable markets to prevent economic collapse. My CFO flagged your company as a high-risk asset. The bank was preparing to foreclose next week. They were going to take the excavators. Dad, they were going to take the house. He swayed slightly. My mother reached out and grabbed his arm to steady him. So, he choked out, so you own me?
"I own the debt," I corrected him. "And because I own the debt, I get to decide what happens next."
I took a step closer. I told my team not to liquidate. I told them to save the company. I am restructuring the loan. You keep your job, the men keep their jobs, the trucks stay in the yard. Hope flickered in his eyes, a desperate, pathetic thing. You are paying it off? No, I said ruthlessly. I am taking control. I saw the hope die, replaced by shock. The company will be managed by a board of directors appointed by me, I said. You will remain as the head of operations. You will run the sites. You will manage the crews. You do the work you are good at, the real work, remember? The bricks and the mortar. But the finances? The checkbook? That belongs to me now. He stared at me. He opened his mouth to argue, to roar, to tell me that no daughter of his was going to tell him how to spend his money, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the phone in my hand, the phone that connected me to a $6 billion empire. Then he looked at his own hands, empty and calloused. He realized the trap had snapped shut. He couldn't refuse. If he refused, he lost everything. If he accepted, he kept his dignity in the eyes of the town, but he lost his crown in the eyes of his family. And the house, I added, glancing at Mom. The house goes into a trust for Mom. You can't mortgage it again. Not for Ethan. Not for anyone. My mother let out a long, shaky breath. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her spine straighten. She knew what I had just done. I hadn't just saved the house. I had given her security that didn't depend on his mood or his business gambles. Alina, Dad said, his voice trembling, you can't do this. I am your father. And I am your investor, I said. This is business. Dad, isn't that what you always taught me? Stability, security, practicality. I am being practical. You are a bad credit risk. I am fixing the asset. I used his words. I used his logic. I turned the very weapons he had used to bludgeon my dreams into the cage that now held him. You have a choice, I said. You can walk away right now. You can let the bank take it all. You can be on your own, just like you told me to be, or you can accept the help. But the help comes with my rules. He looked around the stadium. He looked at the thousands of people cheering for their children. He looked at the life he had built, which was teetering on the edge of a cliff. He looked at me, and he finally saw me. He didn't see the little girl who needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the world. He saw a woman who had conquered the world he was afraid of. He saw a shark, and he knew, deep down in his gut, that he had created her. He started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. I can't lose the business. The guys, they need the work. Good, I said. Then we have a deal. I didn't offer my hand to shake. We weren't partners. Not really. I was the institution, and he was the applicant. Check your email when you get home,
I said. "The papers will be there." I turned back to the ceremony. My name was going to be called soon. I was going to walk across that stage, shake the dean's hand, and accept a piece of paper that my father thought was useless. But as I stood there, listening to the applause ripple through the crowd, I knew that the real graduation had already happened. I hadn't just graduated from college, I had graduated from him. I glanced sideways. Dad was standing very still, staring at the field. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash, checking his limbs to see what was broken. He was safe. His company was safe. His home was safe. But the illusion of his power had been shattered into a million pieces, and we both knew he would spend the rest of his life picking them up, one by one, under my watch. The private restructuring of my family's hierarchy had barely concluded when the public invasion began. It started with a ripple of commotion near the stadium tunnel, the kind of disturbance that draws the eye against its will. A security guard was gesturing frantically, but he was quickly bypassed. Leading the charge was Alana Cruz, looking every inch the high-powered public relations executive in her sharp blazer, holding a press pass high in the air like a talisman. Behind her, moving with the aggressive fluidity of a pack of hunting dogs, were 3 cameramen and a reporter I recognized from a major financial news network. They weren't looking for the dean. They weren't looking for the valedictorian. They were scanning the rows of black-robed graduates with predatory focus. "Alina!" Alana shouted, pointing directly at row 42. The sound of my name being called by a woman who commanded the room shattered the last remnant of the ceremony's decorum. The reporter, a woman with sharp features and a microphone that bore the logo of a global news giant, surged forward. The cameramen flanked her, their lenses swinging around to capture the scene. My father, Ron Lane, took a half step back. For all his bluster about the real world, he had never actually encountered this version of it. He was used to the quiet menace of a bank manager or the loud arguments of a construction site. He was not prepared for the blinding, intrusive, high-definition glare of the 24-hour news cycle. The reporter thrust the microphone over the railing, effectively boxing me in. "Alina Patel," she said, her voice projected and practiced, the kind of voice that cuts through background noise. "We are live. Can you confirm for our viewers that you are indeed the co-founder and CEO of Lumisphere Analytics, the company that just shattered opening day expectations on the New York Stock Exchange with a valuation of over $6 billion? The number hung in the air again. $6 billion. I saw the camera lens focus on me. I saw the red tally light blink on. Millions of people were potentially watching this feed. My classmates were watching. The investors were watching. And standing right next to me, breathing shallow, terrified breaths, my father was watching. I didn't shrink. I didn't hide behind my graduation cap. I looked directly into the lens. "I can confirm that," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had shaken me only minutes ago. "I am the CEO, and yes, the market has responded very positively this morning." "Positively is an understatement," the reporter pressed, sensing the energy. "You are officially one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country under the age of 30. How does it feel to be the face of a financial revolution right here in your cap and gown?" I glanced at the phone in my hand, where the stock ticker was still climbing, green and relentless. Then I looked back at the reporter. "The valuation is a validation of our technology, not just our bank accounts," I said, pivoting to the talking points Alana and I had practiced, though she never imagined I would be delivering them from a folding chair in a stadium. "Our mission at Lumisphere isn't just to generate returns, it is to reduce response times in disaster zones. The capital we raised today means we can deploy our predictive models to 3 more continents by the end of the year. It means saving lives when the next hurricane hits. That is the metric that matters to me." It was a perfect CEO answer, humble, mission-driven, and authoritative. The reporter nodded, clearly impressed, but she wasn't done. She was looking for the human angle. She was looking for the drama. Her eyes slid past me and landed on the 2 people standing frozen at my side. "And this must be your family," she said,
signaling the cameraman to widen the shot. The lens zoomed out, capturing my mother, who looked like she might faint, and my father, who looked like he was facing a firing squad. "Mr. and Mrs. Lane," the reporter said, thrusting the microphone toward my father's face, "you are standing here at your daughter's graduation, finding out, along with the rest of the world, that she is a titan of the tech industry. You must be overwhelmed with pride. What is going through your mind right now, seeing her achieve this level of success?" The question was a trap. Though the reporter didn't know it, she expected a standard answer. She expected tears of joy, a hug, a gushing statement about how they always knew I was special. But Ron Lane couldn't give that answer. He couldn't lie. Not when the truth of our conversation from 2 minutes ago was still burning in his throat. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face was a mask of shock. He looked at the camera, then he looked at me. His eyes wide and pleading. He was terrified of being exposed. He was terrified that I would take this microphone and tell the world exactly what he had texted me an hour ago. He was stripped bare. The moral armor he had worn for 20 years, the armor of the hard-working, all-knowing patriarch who keeps the silly women in line, had been vaporized. He was just a man in a cheap suit standing next to a powerhouse, and he knew that everyone watching could see the power imbalance. I could have done it. I could have destroyed him. I could have looked into that camera and said, "Actually, my father told me this morning to expect no help. He thinks computers are for children." It would have been the ultimate revenge. It would have gone viral instantly. But as I looked at him, sweating under the lights, I realized that destroying him publicly was unnecessary. He was already destroyed. The man who needed to be the hero was now the bystander in his own daughter's story. I reached out and gently placed my hand on the microphone, guiding it back toward myself. "My parents are still processing a lot of emotions right now," I said smoothly, stepping in front of him, shielding him while simultaneously silencing him. "This is a big day for everyone, and to be honest, the world of high-frequency data analytics is very different from the world I grew up in." I paused, letting the implication land. "My family has not always understood the scope of my work," I continued, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. "It is hard to see the value in lines of code when you are used to working with your hands. But I think today proves that just because you don't understand something, that doesn't mean it isn't real. We are all learning to see each other in a new light." It was a masterful non-answer. To the public, it sounded like a gracious daughter acknowledging a generational gap. But to my father, every word was a razor. Just because you don't understand something, that doesn't mean it isn't real. I was publicly forgiving his ignorance while highlighting it. The reporter sensed the tension, but decided not to press the shell-shocked father. She pivoted again, checking her notes on a small tablet. "Speaking of your background," she said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of a scoop, "we have received reports from local sources in Indiana. There are rumors circulating that a mysterious donor has been keeping public services afloat in your hometown of Maple Ridge for the last few years. The mayor's office is practically confirming it is you. Is it true? Have you been secretly funding your hometown while building this empire?" My father flinched. This was the second blow. The first was my success. The second was his dependence. I felt the weight of the moment. This was the thumbnail shot. This was the image that would be plastered across YouTube and Twitter for the next week. I glanced sideways at my father. He was staring at me with a look I had never seen before. Absolute vulnerability. He was waiting for me to claim the credit he had stolen. He was waiting for me to say, "Yes, I paid his bills. I saved his company." I turned back to the camera. I kept my face impassive, my chin high. "I believe in supporting the community that made me," I said. "But I also believe that charity shouldn't be a marketing stunt. Sometimes, the best help is the kind that you give without asking for anything in return, not even a thank you, and certainly not an expectation of repayment." I emphasized the words, expectation, help. It was a direct echo of his text message. Don't expect help. The camera caught it all. It caught the serene confidence on my face. It caught the green line of the stock chart on the phone I was still holding near my chest, and most cruelly, it caught the face of Ron Lane standing just over my shoulder. He looked devastated. He looked like a man who had just realized that the useless daughter he had tried to mold into a secretary was actually the architect of his entire survival. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes glassy with regret, and a sudden, crushing humility. He wasn't the angry father anymore. He was the debtor. "That is an incredible sentiment," the reporter said, sensing the segment was wrapping up. "Alina Patel, congratulations on the graduation, and congratulations on the IPO. The world is watching you." "Thank you," I said. The red light on the camera blinked off. The reporter lowered the microphone and signaled to her producer. The whirlwind of media began to recede, moving on to find the next angle, leaving us standing in the wreckage of the old family dynamic. I didn't look at my father immediately. I looked at the phone in my hand. The stock was at $38. I had made another $400 million during that 2-minute interview. "Alina," my mother whispered. She reached out and touched my arm. You didn't tell them about the business, about Dad." I looked at my mother, then at my father, who was staring at the ground, his face burning with shame. "No," I said quietly, "I didn't, because unlike him, I don't need to humiliate someone to feel powerful." My father looked up then. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no filter of parental authority. He saw me clearly. He saw the mercy I had just shown him, and he understood exactly how much that mercy cost. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to finally say the words he should have said years ago, but the loudspeakers crackled overhead. "Alina Patel," the dean's voice boomed across the stadium. It was my turn. "I have to go," I said. "I have a degree to collect." I adjusted my cap, turned my back on the man who had told me to survive on my own, and walked toward the stage. I walked alone, but the sound of my footsteps felt heavy, solid, and undeniably permanent. I was walking away from the past and stepping into a future that I had bought and paid for. One line of code at a time, the security team I had hired weeks ago, anticipating a chaotic exit, finally made their presence known. 2 large men in dark suits materialized from the edges of the media scrum, gently but firmly parting the sea of reporters to create a path for us. I asked them to take us somewhere quiet, away from the prying lenses and the microphones that were hungry for more family drama. They led us beneath the bleachers to a concrete holding area used for storing equipment, a gray and dusty space that smelled of chalk and old rubber. It was stark, cold, and perfect. There were no cameras here. There was no applause. There was just the low, thrumming vibration of the crowd above our heads and the 3 of us standing in a triangle of uneasy silence. My father, Ron, leaned against a stack of gym mats, his breathing heavy. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon in a suit that was 2 sizes too tight. He was trying to regain his composure, trying to find the mask of authority he had dropped in the stands, but it was gone, shattered. "So," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete cavern, "you own the debt. That is what you said. You own Lane Construction." "Technically, a subsidiary of Lumisphere owns the debt," I corrected him, my voice calm. "But I control the subsidiary. So, yes, effectively, I hold the papers." He dragged a hand down his face. "And what does that mean? Alina, are you going to shut me down? Is that the plan? You get your revenge, and I go to the unemployment line?" "Revenge is expensive and inefficient," I said, leaning against the cold wall. "I don't care about revenge. Dad, I care about solvency. I care about the fact that you have run your company into the ground because you refuse to adapt. You kept betting on the wrong things. You bet on Ethan. You bet on the past. And you bet against me." He flinched at the mention of Ethan. "I have a proposal," I continued, crossing my arms over my graduation gown. "It is already drawn up. My lawyers are sending it to your office right now. We call it a restructuring agreement." "Restructuring." He spat the word out like it was poison. That is fancy talk for a takeover. It is a rescue, I said sharply. Here are the terms. Lane Construction stays open. Nobody gets fired. The guys you have worked with for 20 years keep their paychecks. I'm injecting enough capital to clear the immediate arrears with the vendors. The excavators stay in the yard. I saw his shoulders drop an inch. The relief was involuntary. He had been terrified of losing the physical symbols of his work. But, I said, and his head snapped back up, there is a cost. You are stepping down as the financial controller. You will remain the head of operations. You run the sites. You manage the crew. You build the walls. But you do not sign the checks anymore. You do not approve loans. You do not touch the books. That authority transfers to a financial officer appointed by my board. You are gelding me, he whispered, his face flushing red. You are making me an employee in my own company. I am making you a manager in a solvent company, I countered. The alternative is bankruptcy. The alternative is that I let the foreclosure proceed. The bank takes the equipment, and you explain to your crew why they don't have jobs on Monday. Choose. He pushed himself off the mats, his anger flaring up one last time. It was the desperate, thrashing anger of a cornered animal. You are enjoying this, aren't you? You are using your money to punish me. You think because you got lucky with some computer program that you know how the world works? You are doing this to humiliate me because I was hard on you. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of clarity. I am not doing this to punish you, I said, my voice dropping to a register that was deadly serious. I am doing this because I am the only adult in the room. You leveraged the business to 110%. You gambled on a bar that has 0 foot traffic. You made bad decisions. Dad, I am using my resources to fix the mess you made, but I am not going to let you keep making the same mistakes with my money. That is not revenge. That is responsibility. Someone has to pay the price for your pride, and I am making sure it is you, not Mom, and not your workers. I turned to my mother, who was standing quietly by the door. She looked terrified, but there was a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. And that brings me to the house, I said. My father froze. The house has nothing to do with this. The house is collateral, I reminded him. You put it up against the business loan. If the business fails, the house goes, that ends today, as part of the deal. The lien on the house is being severed. I am paying it off in full. But the deed is not going back to you. I walked over to my mother and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she squeezed mine back with surprising strength. The house is going into an irrevocable trust, I said, looking at my father. The trustees are me and Mom. You can live there for the rest of your life. You will never be homeless. But you can never mortgage it again. You can never risk Mom's security for one of your hunches again. It is over. My father looked at my mother. Deborah, he pleaded, you are going to let her do this? She is stealing our home. My mother took a deep breath. She looked at the man she had followed for 30 years, the man whose loud voice and certainty had governed every aspect of her life. Then she looked at me, the daughter who had quietly paid for her surgery, the daughter who had just faced down the world press. She is not stealing it, Ron, my mother said, her voice shaking but clear. She is saving it. You would have lost it. We both know that. You would have lost it for Ethan. The mention of his favorite son, the golden boy who had drained them dry, was the final blow. My father looked from his wife to me, and he realized he was completely alone. The coalition of silence that had kept him in power was broken. He had no allies left. He stared at us for a long moment, and then his legs seemed to give out. He sank back down onto the stack of gym mats, burying his face in his hands. He didn't look like a tyrant anymore. He looked like a ruin. His voice was muffled by his palms. I didn't want to be the one who failed. I wanted to be the one who took care of you. When you started with the computers, when you started getting smarter than me, I got scared. I thought if you didn't need me, you wouldn't respect me. I used stability as an excuse because I was terrified of being left behind. It was a confession wringed out of him by total defeat.
He looked up, his eyes wet, red-rimmed, and pleading. I am sorry, Alina. I truly am. Can we start over? I will learn. I will listen. Just don't shut me out. He reached a hand out toward me. It was a gesture of supplication, a request for a hug, for immediate forgiveness, for the instant gratification of a movie ending where the family embraces and the credits roll. I looked at his hand. I felt a tug in my chest, the old instinct of the little girl who just wanted her dad to smile at her, but I didn't move. I didn't take his hand. Forgiveness is cheap if it doesn't come with change, and change takes time. We can't start over. Dad, I said softly, we can only move forward, and moving forward means you have to learn how to speak to me. You don't talk down to me anymore. You don't tell me what I can and cannot do. You treat me like the CEO who just saved your life, not the child you think doesn't understand the real world. I stepped back, creating distance again. If you can do that, I said, then maybe, in time, we can have a relationship. But right now, I have somewhere to be. I adjusted my cap. I smoothed the front of my gown. You should go home, read the papers, sign them. And Dad, don't be late for work on Monday. You have a new boss. I turned around and walked out of the concrete room. I didn't look back. I heard my mother whispering something to him, a sound of comfort, but also of firmness. But I didn't stop to listen. I walked back up the tunnel, toward the light and the noise of the stadium. The ceremony was nearing its end. The last names were being called. I emerged into the bright, humid air of the stadium just as the dean reached the letter P. Alina Patel, his voice boomed. I walked across the grass. The sound that greeted me was not polite applause. It was a roar. It started from the students who had seen the news, then spread to the parents who had checked their phones, and finally to the faculty on the stage. It was a wave of recognition. They weren't cheering for a student. They were cheering for a survivor. They were cheering for a woman who had turned 5 years of silence into a $6 billion scream. I walked up the stairs. I shook the dean's hand. I took the diploma, a piece of paper that my father had called useless, but which now felt like a receipt for the price I had paid to be here. I stopped at the center of the stage and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that crowd, or perhaps already in the parking lot, was my father. He was a smaller man now, living in a smaller world, and I was standing here, breathing air that felt thinner, cleaner, and exhilaratingly free. I pulled my phone out of my pocket one last time. I looked at the screen. The stock was hovering at $42. The green line was steady. I smiled, not for the cameras, but for myself. The money was nice, the power was useful, but the real victory wasn't the billions. The real victory was that for the first time in my life, when I looked at my future, I didn't see his shadow blocking the sun. I put the phone away, looked up at the sky, and threw my cap as high as it would go. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Alina's final decision. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.